Pam Bondi had been in plenty of courtrooms before. She knew how to handle herself under pressure, how to face down powerful opponents, and how to push back when things got messy. But this case, this judge, this was something else entirely. From the moment she stepped into the courtroom, something felt off. The judge, an older man with a reputation for being unpredictable, had been glaring at her as if she had already lost before a single word had been spoken. His tone was clipped, dismissive, as if he had already made up his mind about her, about the case, about everything. But why? Was it the case itself? The high-profile nature of it? The cameras in the back of the courtroom capturing every second for the public to dissect? Or was it something deeper, something personal? Did he resent her reputation? Did he see her as a threat? It did not take long for things to escalate. The first sign was in the interruptions. Every time Pam spoke, the judge cut her off, snapping back with condescending remarks, rolling his eyes, acting as if her arguments were beneath him. When she pushed forward, refusing to be dismissed, he grew more aggressive, leaning over his bench, voice growing sharper with every exchange. What was he trying to do? Was this about control? Power? Was he trying to provoke her into losing her temper, to turn the court against her before she even had the chance to present her case? Pam was not new to this game. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was not going to let it slide. The courtroom was silent, tension thick in the air as she squared her shoulders and met the judge's glare head-on. He wanted her to back down, to shrink under his authority, to play the part of the lawyer who knew her place. But that was not who she was. The judge, sensing that she was not breaking, decided to escalate further. His voice rose. His words became harsher, his insults less veiled. He was no longer just arguing the case, he was attacking her directly, dismissing her credentials, her experience, even suggesting that she had no business being in his courtroom at all. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking in rapid succession. People knew something was happening here, something more than a legal debate. Pam could have let it go. She could have played it safe, taken the hits, and moved on. But why should she? She had spent years building her reputation, fighting battles others were too afraid to take on. And now, in front of an audience, in front of the world, this judge thought he could humiliate her? He was about to learn just how wrong he was. What happened next would turn the courtroom into absolute chaos. And by the time it was over, it would not be Pam Bondi who left in disgrace. The moment the judge finished his latest attack, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. His words had gone beyond professional disagreement. He had made it personal. He had belittled her career, questioned her integrity, and, whether he realized it or not, pushed past the point of no return. Pam Bondi did not flinch. She had spent her entire career dealing with men like this. Men who mistook arrogance for authority, who believed that the louder they shouted, the more right they became. But this time he had underestimated her. He thought she would take the abuse, lower her head, let him have the final word. Instead, she tore his argument apart, piece by piece, right in front of everyone. Her voice was steady, cutting through, the tension like a knife. She did not match his volume, because she did not need to. The strength of her words was enough. She exposed his bias, pointed out the clear inconsistencies in his handling of the case, and reminded the courtroom, reminded the cameras of what this was supposed to be. A fair trial, not a one-man performance. And that was when the shift happened. The people in the courtroom had already sensed something was off, but now they were seeing it clearly. This was not a judge overseeing a case with fairness. This was a man with an agenda, one who had come into the courtroom ready to decide the case before it had even been argued. The judge knew it too. He could feel the energy turning against him. His authority was slipping, and it enraged him. So he lashed out. He slammed his gavel down, demanding silence, his voice shaking with anger. He accused Pam of being out of line, of disrespecting the court, of trying to undermine the very system she claimed to serve. But his words were empty now. Pam had not disrespected the court. She had done something far more dangerous to a man like him. She had exposed him, and that was when she saw it. A flicker of panic in his expression. A hesitation, a realization that he had pushed too far, that he had let his emotions override his position. Pam pressed forward. She brought up his history, his previous cases, his pattern of bias, his questionable rulings that had been quietly discussed but never truly challenged in a setting like this. She did not raise her voice, she did not break composure, but she laid it all out, forcing the courtroom to see him for what he was. The judge's face darkened. He was losing control. So he did something desperate. He threatened her, not just with contempt of court, not just with removal, but with something far worse, something meant to send a message that she had gone too far. The courtroom gasped. The cameras flashed. The reporters whispered frantically to each other, knowing that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. But Pam Bondi was not afraid. She had been waiting for this moment, and now she had everything she needed to take him down completely. What happened next would leave the entire courtroom stunned, because by the end of it the judge would not just be humiliated, he would be in handcuffs. For the first time, the judge realized he had made a grave mistake. The courtroom was no longer his. The weight of his title, the authority of his position, none of it mattered now. The moment he lashed out, the moment he let his emotions override, his control, he had given Pam Bondi exactly what she needed. She did not hesitate. With a measured breath, she turned to the gallery, addressing not just the court, but the eyes of the public watching through the cameras. She outlined everything: the judge's personal vendetta, his blatant disregard for professional conduct, and now his open abuse of power. Every word was precise, deliberate, cutting through whatever illusion of authority he had left. The judge tried to silence her, hammering his gavel down so hard it nearly cracked against the wood, but it was pointless now. The courtroom was no longer hanging on his words. They were hanging on hers. And then, with the calm of someone who had already won, Pam Bondi delivered the final blow. She laid out the legal consequences of his actions, every threat he had made, every abuse of authority, every moment of bias. She spelled it all out, linking it to the very laws he was supposed to uphold, laws that, ironically, did not protect him, but condemned him. The murmurs in the courtroom grew into full-blown shock. Lawyers whispered to each other, reporters scribbled furiously, and the judge, realizing the trap had snapped shut around him, started to panic. He denied everything, his voice rising, his hands gripping the bench as if it could save him. He called her accusations absurd, claimed she was twisting reality, insisted that he had done nothing wrong. But no one believed him anymore. Pam remained steady, unshaken. And then, turning to the bailiff, she did something that no one had ever dared to do in his courtroom. She ordered his arrest. For a moment there was only silence. The judge's face turned a deep shade of red, his mouth opening and closing, as if he could not process what had just been said. He laughed, scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. But then the bailiff took a step forward. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, people turning to each other in shock. The judge's arrogance shattered in an instant, replaced by something far more human: fear. He barked orders, demanded that the bailiff stand down, claimed that this was outrageous, that she had no authority to do this. But Pam had been careful. She had built her case piece by piece, backed by undeniable facts, and now the law was not on his side. The bailiff hesitated only for a second. Then, slowly, methodically, he reached for his handcuffs. The judge's face twisted in sheer disbelief. Pam watched as he struggled, his mind racing for a way out, for something, anything that could undo what was happening. But there was nothing left. He had crossed too many lines, underestimated her one too many times, and now, in front of everyone, the judge who had tried to humiliate Pam Bondi was about to be led out of his own courtroom in disgrace. But the final humiliation had yet to come, because what happened next would ensure that no one, no judge, no official, no one who had ever wielded power unfairly, would ever forget this moment. The moment the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the judge's composure shattered completely. His hands clenched into fists, his breath came in short, panicked gasps, and for the first time in his entire career, he had no control, no authority, no power. The courtroom was no longer a place where he dictated the rules. It had become a stage for his downfall. Pam Bondi stood tall, watching as the reality of the situation settled into the judge's face. He could not believe it. The man who had spent years ruling from the bench, making and breaking cases with a single decision, was now nothing more than a disgraced official being hauled away like a common criminal. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing every second. The reporters were already forming headlines in their minds, ones that would spread across the country before the day was over. A judge arrested in his own courtroom, a judge who thought he was untouchable, brought to his knees. He fought against the cuffs, insisting it was a mistake, that this was illegal, that Pam Bondi had orchestrated some grand conspiracy to take him down. His voice cracked as he ranted, his words growing more desperate, more pathetic. But no one was listening anymore. Pam had done what no one thought possible. She had taken on a man who had spent years bending the law to his will, who had crushed careers with his decisions, who had wielded his power recklessly, and she had beaten him in front of the entire world. The bailiff tightened his grip on the judge's arm, pulling him toward the exit. The once mighty figure stumbled, his legs weak, his expression hollow, and then the final humiliation came. As he was dragged toward the door, a slow murmur began to spread through the gallery. People were whispering, shaking their heads, some even laughing. The man who had always been feared, who had sat high above everyone else, was now being treated like the very criminals he had sentenced, with smug satisfaction. Pam Bondi did not gloat. She did not need to. The scene spoke for itself. By the time the judge was forced through the heavy wooden doors, disappearing from sight, the courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Pam turned, gathering her papers, calm and composed. She had not just won a case, she had set a precedent, a reminder that power unchecked would always meet its reckoning. And as she walked out of the courtroom, the cameras following every step, one undeniable truth hung in the air. Justice had been served.